I recently lost my beloved mother, and what that loss does to a mind and body is hard to reconcile within the context of everyday life. Since you're a soul with a creative spark, where did your mind go during bereavement, and how did it inspire the Shrouds?
Well, I knew that, of course, I could anticipate the loss because I was taking care of her for 2 years while she was having chemotherapy. Okay. And she had been sick she had been diagnosed when she was 45. So we had 22 years of having this hang over our head. So you would think that in all that time, of course, we both talked about it very openly, about how it would feel if she died before I did, which seemed suddenly likely, even though I was older than she was, and I always felt that I was the one who was going to die first and should, because I was older, male, so on. Right. And you would think that you would come up with some real expectation of how you would feel, but it was completely surprised me in so many ways. Really strange, for example, and you'll forgive me if I repeat some things, but for example, I had always thought that I was protecting her. She's the woman, she's the mother of children, I'm the man, I'm protecting her. Right. I don't mean physically particularly, but psychologically. Sure. And then when she died, I felt totally vulnerable and weak. And I suddenly realized that she had been protecting me all that time. And that her support had been incredibly important to me, even though I took it for granted. So that particular thing. I also felt really old. While I was with her, living together, we could still remember ourselves as young lovers. It was still alive in us, in our relationship. And then suddenly she dies, and then I'm just me, and I'm suddenly, old, relatively, in my 70s. I'm now in 82. And that surprised me. I felt unattractive, like who would ever be interested in having a relationship with me? Also not knowing whether I could have a relationship with someone else, since it had been we had been together for 43 years. Right. So, all of these things. There are many other variations on that. Yeah.
So you are of a generation that didn't have a lifelong immersion in digital tech like today, but you also were forward-thinking in your use of movie special effects. How did that fascination transition you to where we're at today, and where do you see that transitional effect in the Shrouds?
Yeah, that's all very natural, really, because I started in the 1960s making movies and shooting them myself and editing myself, and the most elaborate kind of effect I could afford was maybe a dissolve or a fade out.
Sure.
And so learning how the labs work, how film works, and so on. But as time went on, there were all kinds of accumulations of interesting things that could happen with, and then of course the transition to digital was immense, and for me very welcome, frankly, because I have film is horrible to work with, frankly. Yeah. We have nostalgia for film because many great movies have been made on film. Sure. But for a director, I can't imagine. It's only the force of nostalgia that would force people to go back. And I was talking to Brady Corbett, who shot The Brutalist and VistaVision. I mean, he resurrected VistaVision, used the old VistaVision lenses. Nobody wants to see a movie in VistaVision anymore. So it's fetishistic, honestly, because digital is so much better, and the quality is superior to film now. Yeah. And you have so much more control and flexibility, and as an artist, that's what you want. So I started playing with computers in the 80s, and I was right there at the beginning of digital. And so I had no problem. I mean, I can see how some people my age, 82 as I say, might be baffled by digital stuff and so on, don't know how to, use their phone and so on. And I had no trouble with that, actually, because it just seemed very natural to me, and I was sort of a tech nerd at that point anyway. Yeah. So I welcome it. It's just another tool, though, in the toolbox. It doesn't mean that you have to use it. It doesn't mean that you can't use physical effects if you prefer that. To me, it's a combination, you know.
Sure.
And it's wonderful. I don't think of the digital stuff that we do as being big, huge, vast, you know, creating new worlds. It's very subtle stuff, you know, like that no audience would look at it and say, "Wow, that's a great effect." It's not an effect. It's an improvement. It's touching up the canvas, you know. Very subtle stuff.
Interesting. So Diane Kruger portrays three different sides of Karsh's particular dilemma. How did you and she collaborate to create the separation between her characters, especially the sisters?
Well, I often say that the director, the script is the first director of actors in particular. It's the dialogue. The dialogue I wrote was different for the two characters, the two sisters. They were in different circumstances as well. One was alive and healthy, and the other one was dead and mutilated. So the dialogue was yes. So really, just being an actor, she's a wonderful actress. I mean, she's German. You cannot her accent is perfect. You know, in English. I mean, it's just she's really great, and she. Immediately reading it, understood the emotionality that was there and what the difference was, because Becca is mostly suffering and mostly trying to deal with love while suffering, and love while suffering, sex while suffering is difficult, and many people, of course, have to endure that. Whereas her sister Terry is healthy and funny and kind of mischievous. And quite sort of, she's quite a different character. And so it was, Diana felt the huge emotionality of Becca, the wife who died, and the playfulness and the mischievousness of Terry. And she said she had quite a lot of fun with Terry. But it comes right, first of all, from the dialogue.
Right. Speaking of sex. The arousal associated with conspiracies reminded me of your similar themes in Crash. What fascination with sexual energy and the kink of unlikely topics for arousal occurred to you? Or is it something that you've lived with since the end of your latency period?
Well, I could hope for that. But I think there's a numbing effect that's possible in current life that perhaps always was. It's so easy to be distracted, so easy to be overwhelmed by digital technology, by the number of emails and texts and screens, and how do you get back to sex? You know, this very basic physical thing, which normally does not directly involve screens. You know, and so some of it is sort of. I need it to be extreme for me to be able to feel it because I'm so numbed, and I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it.
Makes sense. Guy Pearce, one of our finest actors, represents a tech industry that is increasingly paranoid and destructive in this paranoia. In your opinion, will tech be our undoing or a road to another sort of nirvana, and why?
Well, I really see technology as being 100% a reflection of what we are. You know, it doesn't come from outer space the way people thought of it in the 40s and 50s, like alien technology, non-human. It's all human. And so it will be horrible and also wonderful because we are both those things. And so I am not afraid of AI any more than I'm afraid of the atomic bomb, you know?
Right.
Atomic energy can be great. Atomic bombs can be, and have been, hideous. So you could sort of expect the same from AI, both things. Meanwhile, though, in film, we've basically been using a kind of AI for years, you know, with the visuals and graphic computer stuff. So it's not a shockingly different thing. it is pretty impressive these days with the
deep fakes.
Yes,
Yeah.
and the large language and all of that. It is quite impressive, and it will call up huge questions, of course, about copyright and theft and all of that. I really don't think it's that different from the past, though, when plagiarism was possible with just text and books, Yeah. So it's an extreme version of what we've already gone through.
So interesting. What habit did you develop in your first few films as a filmmaker, speaking of 1960s, that you've carried with you even up to the Shrouds?
I usually have a nap instead of lunch. That might sound like I'm being superficial and flippant, but in fact, the habits are very much about survival while shooting a movie, because it's really difficult and it involves a lot of people, a lot of pressure, a lot of time pressure, and you have to find a way to maintain your focus and your sanity while doing it. So it mostly has to do with the rhythms of that. Eat a quick lunch and then nap, for the hour that everybody takes off and so on. Small, silly things like that are not very glamorous, and they're not. But when one of my nephews, who has directed a couple of movies, asked me for the advice, I said, "Make sure you take naps whenever you can."
That's sanity is always glamorous. Now, since you've gone through a radical history of change in the film business, what do you find both the disadvantages and advantages of how films are distributed today, and does one outweigh the other?
Well, of course, I'm not sort of directly involved in the distribution of my films, and of course it happens differently in different countries and different areas.
Yes.
But right now, certainly, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but it's times are very strange right now for cinema, because of the pandemic, plus Netflix, plus streaming in general. Everything's been turned upside down. Cinemas are disappearing. There being fewer and bigger cinemas, but, very restricted kind of films that they show. And also, it's very difficult to know if your film is a success or not, because it's not like the old days where the number of tickets equals success or failure. Right. Here, there are no tickets. So if Netflix gets more subscribers, can you really attribute that to your film alone? Not likely. So you don't know really how successful your film has been, and in terms of money and residuals, money that you're paid to if your film is successful, these are very contentious things, because the success can be hidden easily. And nobody really knows quite what's going on. Talk about conspiracy.
Well, since you're a Canadian, you set your early films there, obviously. When you made the transition to setting a film in America, what changed in story atmosphere for you? And was America's violent tendencies the natural setting for a history of violence?
I think yes. It was shot 100% in Canada, in a small town outside of Toronto. But its source material was a graphic novel, and a screenplay that had been written based on that, written by an American. So the Americanness of it was already innately there.
Gotcha.
And certainly I was willing to plunge directly into that and to not try to diffuse it or change it, because that's what attracted me to it. Mm-hmm. And of course, my father was born in Baltimore, and I used to come as a kid to New York City a lot, because I had an uncle there who taught German drama at New York City College. So as a kid I was there. And also we'd go to Washington. I saw the Washington Monument when I was like 8 years old, and the Lincoln Memorial and Ford Theater. So American culture has not been foreign to me, let us say. It is very different from Canadian culture, and sometimes depending on whether it amuses us or distresses us, Americans really think sometimes we're just sort of more polite Americans, but the cultures are very different. So yes, I was accepting that. Just as when I made Spider, I was accepting the English ethos. You know, when you're a director, you're kind of like an actor. You're like a chameleon. You change. You know, you are performing, and it's a different reality, and that's part of the fun of directing.
You know, you have films that evoke unique emotions in people and unique essayists or whatever. And I know an artist, once the art is put into the world, they're just saying, this is it. I'm not going to make a big to-do about it. The point of my question is, have you ever been surprised about a film that you've done, just culturally, how it expanded or what people think of it, based on the fact that you thought, oh, there's no way I could think of something like that, or, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm constantly surprised, really. I'm constantly surprised. You just don't know whether your film will just sink like a stone without making a ripple, or whether it'll make a big wave, or maybe something in between. You really don't know. And it varies, once again, from country to country, culture to culture. Right. I really did not think that Crash would be the scandal that it was, because it was based on a relatively old J.G. Ballard novel that was well known. So nobody was going crazy over Ballard's book, like nobody was outraged. And so when I made a relatively faithful adaptation of the book, I didn't think it would cause a big stir, but it did. So that was a big surprise, you know. Right. And then in retrospect, you know, the Videodrome being thought as being kind of prophetic in terms of the internet and so on, because you just don't, you really don't know. You know partly what you're doing, what you think you're doing, but you're not always sure about what you're doing.
Sure. The soul of an artist. When you first started coming into the studio system, what was it, late 70s, early 80s, or dealing with the American studio system, what did you find absurd about it, I guess, is the question.
Yeah. Well, there have been a lot of satires made about Hollywood, and in fact, The Studio is a TV series right now that is continuing that tradition.
Yes.
And I have to say, though I had not had a lot of direct interaction with the studios, I've had enough, and I could tell you some very amusing stories about just ridiculous people with a lot of power, or people who thought they had a lot of power and didn't really. People who they knew the image of the role that they were supposed to play as, let's say, studio executives, but really didn't have the talent for it. And so I have had to deal with all of that. I would think with a good sense of humor, which is we have evolved to have a sense of humor as a survival strategy, and if you're going to deal with Hollywood, you better have that.
Is there anybody you got to meet when you got to a level where you say, "Oh, I finally get to meet so and so"? Did you ever? Yeah,
I got to meet Ted Turner. This is after he had. Kind of wanted to quell Crash,
Well, just in general, though. I didn't mean these studio execs. I meant just in general in the film business or movie stars.
Tons of people. I've met tons of people. And I'm fairly reclusive, and mostly I'm like, you'll see me in Toronto walking along the street, going to the grocery store to buy bananas and milk, And it's not like some people think because they see you on the red carpet at Cannes and you're wearing a tuxedo, they think that you must have a very glamorous life. I have not a very glamorous life, and I wouldn't really want one. But when I do go to those things, and of course when I'm working on movies, I get to meet really fabulous people in every aspect of the craft of filmmaking. That's really quite terrific.
That's always been my thing. When people ask me, I say I get to meet some of the best creative people and the best creative minds in the world.
Sure, and for me also writers like Burroughs, like Don DeLillo, like Stephen King.
DeLillo. Okay. Now that you have had a long career and you've gotten to be in your early 80s, do you have a philosophy of life as it has evolved, and does it, communicate your art as well?
I have many, it's, for example, someone was just telling me that Quentin Tarantino was sort of tormenting himself about which film should be his last film because it will affect his legacy. And I'm thinking, Quentin, you don't have to worry about that. You can't control what your legacy will be because you can't control what people will think of your films. And also, his fans will not really worry about what's his last film or what was his middle film, So I think it's a sort of self-imposed difficulty there. The world does not need another film by me, if it happens, it happens, but it's not like everybody's waiting. So I would say, I'm pretty existentialist about my legacy, let's put it that way.
This is Patrick McDonald for HollywoodChicago.com. Copyright 2025.